I am trying to convey is that the only way we can get about reducing the deficit is to do the heavy lifting of cutting spending. And no one in Washington has been focused on cutting spending. That's a bipartisan affliction, sadly. We have to actually cut spending.
Where? Where would you cut spending?
Well, let me start by saying that I proposed several weeks ago a series of reforms to make cutting spending easier. So just as an example, we need to put, not only has every agency budget gone up for every year for 60 years, but we actually don't have any idea where the money is spent. I mean, people don't have any idea. So I proposed, let's first create transparency by putting every agency budget up on the internet for everyone to see. Because I truly think people will be shocked by how money is being spent. Second, let's make sure that every piece of legislation goes up on the internet for public comment with its full costing laid out before a vote, not after a vote. So that you don't have a situation like we have now with the health care bill, where we were told it's going to reduce the deficit, and then later it was, no, actually it's not going to reduce the deficit, it's going to increase the deficit. And oh, by the way, we have to help pay for it by asking small businesses to fill out a 1099 for everybody they do over $600 worth of business with. A crushing burden of paperwork. So let's have transparency first. Second, let's go after the $500 billion worth of waste, redundancy, duplication, abuse that has already been identified. I mean, if you have 60 years of constantly increasing budgets and no scrutiny of how the money is spent, it's no wonder we have $500 billion worth of it. Let's go after that. It's been identified. We know where it is. Let's go after it. Third, let's support agency heads like Secretary Gates, who says, I have $100 billion that I can cut out of my budget. I'm certain that he can, having been inside the Defense Department in various advisory roles. And let's hold every agency head to that same standard. Remember when President Obama asked everyone to save $100 million and they came up short of the goal? I mean, it's outrageous. It's outrageous. Every single agency head ought to have a goal to spend at, let's start with just 2008 levels. I mean, we've increased government spending by 10% for each of the last 2 years in incredibly tough economic times. Let's just go back to 2008. Let's freeze salaries. I mean, these are not mysterious things, but clearly people have lacked the will or maybe the experience and expertise to do it.
But when you talk about this has already been identified where waste, a lot of the waste occurs. You've cited continually the Cato Institute study.
And there's Heritage Foundation. I mean, there are other institutes.
The Cato study calls for eliminating the Department of Education and the Department of Housing and Urban Development to save money. Are you in favor of that?
I am not in favor of that, but that single recommendation doesn't mean that the rest of it should be thrown out. I mean, that's pretty typical politician, actually. I don't like this one thing, therefore I'm willing to ignore all of the other
but there's
recommendations.
Some pretty deep cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medi-Cal,
but there are also very fundamental things. What I'm suggesting is let's start with what we know is there. How can you, no business in the world, no family in the world could run with, let's just spend more money each and every year. Think about it, 100,000 new bureaucrats added in the last 12 months. And we now know they make twice on average what the private sector worker makes.
Then
wow.
Can't you name some areas that you'd like to cut? Some
well,
programs?
Sure. When you have, let's just look at this financial regulatory reform bill as an example of an opportunity missed. What happened? We had 20 plus agencies who were responsible in some way for overseeing Wall Street and preventing Bernie Madoff. They all failed. They all failed. There is overlap, there's redundancy, there are gaps in their portfolios, and by the way, they cost a lot of money. And instead of dealing with that instead of saying we need to have a more rigorous, accountable, and streamlined regulatory scheme, what did we do? We said, never mind those 20-plus agencies, we're going to create another one. We're going to create another one called the Consumer Protection Agency, and we now literally have hundreds of regulations that are going to have to be written by thousands of new bureaucrats. Wrong approach. Wrong approach.